Hi, well, thank you very much for joining us in the first of a series of really a video blog, and the mayor getting a chance to at least explain a lot of the different projects that we're working on and also clarifying some of the different economic development tools that we have. Really what I want this to be is a conversation between you and I. Getting a chance to talk about where our community is going on a lot of different venues, the different projects that we're working on, and then ultimately how our perspective might be a different perspective than what's portrayed, for example, in the print media, whether that's within the Portage County Gazette, the Stevens Point Journal, or online with the Stevens Point Journal or the Stevens Point City News. This is a different perspective where no matter how you as a community member get your news, ultimately is not the entire picture, nor does it necessarily appropriately portray all of what's going on and some of the different motives that, of course, the city has in how we pursue different types of projects. So with this first installment of our new video blog, I want to talk a bit about TIF districts and also explain how they are, where they came from, and then how cities can best use TIF districts as instruments for economic development and regeneration. Back in the late 1970s, the state of Wisconsin was experiencing a lot of urban decay, whether that was in Racine, Kenosha, or Milwaukee, but there were some extreme concerns about urban area and urban decay. So the state of Wisconsin acted in a process whereby creating statutorily appropriate laws for redevelopment associations, redevelopment agencies, community development agencies and associations to be able to have condemnation authority and a lot of slum clearance authority through an act whereby the state recognized the extreme need to be engaged in urban renewal throughout the state of Wisconsin. In conjunction with that, the first TIF districts emerged on the scene back in the mid-1970s as a way to capture increment and growth, but to be able to incent development to happen in key areas where communities most needed them, whether that was in the form of urban revitalization, massive demolition of different slum properties and properties that were either blighted or properties that were in need of environmental remediation. It became a mechanism to help communities capture some of that growth to be able to then reinvest it in areas where communities most needed it. At that same time, TIF districts were also used to be able to build new industrial parks. In fact, the city of Stevens Point, having one of the first TIF districts in the state of Wisconsin for the Stevens Point Industrial Park, really created a jobs creation component and a revitalization component of TIF districts. Today, there are three different varieties, almost four different varieties of TIF districts that can be used. One is a general mixed-use TIF district, which allows for a lot of different uses, some industrial, some commercial, some residential. You have revitalization TIF districts, which are normally targeted at areas that need to be revitalized. You have an industrial TIF district, which in essence is a purely jobs creation TIF district that allows for business parks to be developed, industrial parks to be developed. And then you have what's called a brownfield TIF, which is the most broad TIF under state law in terms of the different scopes, the different types of projects, but normally that's geared toward remediation. Those are really the four different types of TIF districts, and what I want to explain to you is how a TIF district is created and what it really does and how it helps the city move forward. Let's examine a revitalization TIF district, for example. We have in the city of Stevens Point currently two revitalization TIF districts. One is in our downtown area, the other is along North Division Street, respectively. They were created and adopted by the Common Council of the city of Stevens Point in 2005 and in 2006. Revitalization TIF districts are very broad, and they're also slightly longer than a standard mixed-use TIF district or an industrial TIF district, which I'll get to because we have examples of those here as well. In essence, in 2005, the city of Stevens Point realized that North Division Street and the general area was an area that was aging, that was needing some revitalization, was needing some energy to be re-injected into it. In essence, that gets back to the general definition of what a TIF district is. It is a geographical boundary that's literally drawn on a map, adopted by the governing body of an institution, that captures growth in value from a time certain to a time certain endpoint. A revitalization TIF district is 27 years. What happens when a TIF district is created is, in essence, you capture all of the parcels that are within that boundary. You take a snapshot in time of what the value is of that district, and then you allow for new projects to happen, new growth, increment, to be developed within that district as a community moves forward. So the North Division Street TIF district, in essence, was created. There was X amount of value. Let's use 50 million of value as the number just for example purposes. What ends up happening is with that $50 million of value, taxes are paid by all the parcels within that district to the 5 taxing jurisdictions that exist. For the city of Stevens Point, that happens to be the city itself, Portage County, the school district, Mid-State Technical College, and the state of Wisconsin. Over the duration of that revitalization TIF district, the 5 taxing jurisdictions on that base value of 50 million stay whole. In other words, all 5 different institutions retain all the tax collections that are paid district-wide on that 50 million. If a new project is built in that district that allows for $1 million of growth in assessed value, that $1 million of growth, or incremental growth, tax incremental financing district, the I in that acronym, that increment is captured. Currently, on $1 million of value, that would produce X amount of tax revenue that goes into that district. The 5 taxing jurisdictions I touched on earlier do not receive any dollars for that increment. The district itself, as a legal entity, retains all of the revenue from the taxes that are paid to be reinvested back into that district. And those investments can take a lot of different forms. That can be road work, that could be utility relocation, that could be demolition, environmental remediation, or general incentives to developers who are interested in building projects that will generate a lot of growth and obviously a lot of excitement in areas that need it. That revitalization component is very important for North Division Street because it was an older area of town. There were buildings that needed to be demoed. There were buildings that needed to be re-energized. This gives us a tool as a community to help projects along in areas where they wouldn't naturally occur without our assistance. Many talk about the free market in terms of how the country develops and the free market in terms of how projects generally move forward. The free market, in some instances, will also leave properties behind. In other words, a failure of the market where governmental intervention is required to have energy come back to potential developments in these areas. North Division Street is a good example. There are projects that we'll talk about in a later segment of our video blog that talks about why it's important for the city to engage to help some of these projects along. Downtown is another example. There are projects and properties within the downtown that need assistance because the free market, in essence, has passed it by. There are some environmental concerns, and a TIF district provides for really economic incentives to allow for developers to come in and consider placing some projects within these areas. So in essence, to recap, a TIF district is a geographical area where a snapshot is taken in time of the value. As projects happen within that district, incremental value increases as projects are built and developed along time. Now, one of the other misconceptions about a TIF district is that when a developer comes into a TIF district, they don't pay taxes. They indeed pay taxes, just as they would if that project was not in a TIF district. The only difference is on the first amount, in other words, on the base value that's associated with their parcel, with the property that they own, all 5 taxing jurisdictions still receive the same revenue on that base value as they did at the time that the TIF district was created. The difference, however, is as a project is built, the increase in value is captured by that district. So the taxes that these developers pay, the city can harness as a tool to either bond money up front to make that project a reality, because there's very specific language within the TIF law that says, but for the use of these incentives, the projects would naturally not move forward. And there are a lot of ways that the but for can be calculated. But for environmental remediation that really keeps anyone away from a site, that becomes a concern and a way, as we harness those incentives, to be able to go back and offset some of the challenges that any site might experience. So a TIF district really becomes, from a revitalization perspective, an area of town that needs added assistance, that's seeing some deterioration of perhaps property value, but more importantly property condition, more than likely, in an area where a community says collectively, we want to use these tools to push and promote development within that area because we see it as a concern of our community. That's really what North Division Street is and downtown is. And as I said, in a future segment of this video blog, we're going to talk about some key projects that we're looking at for downtown as well as North Division Street and ways that we can use the TIF district as a catalyst to make sure that those happen where we most need them as a community to happen. The other TIF districts that we have currently active in our community revolve around the Travel Guard Complex, which is a mixed-use development TIF district, and the Spectra Print Project, which is also a mixed-use development. Rather than being 27 years in length, as the revitalization TIF districts are, these two TIF districts, respectively TIF District 7 and 8, take only 20 years in terms of the amount of time that's allocated by state law for them to exist. And they're also generally mixed use in terms of their approach. Rather than just having one goal or one project in mind, they look at it from a broader point of view. Travel Guard, for example, is really one of our best economic development stories as of late. We harness the increment off of that project, the taxes that they do indeed pay, and we use that tax revenue to offset the initial incentives that the city had to pay for that project to ensure that it would happen, and happen in a way and at a level that the developer and, of course, Chartis and Travel Guard were interested in having. At the same time, our mixed-use TIF district that we have on the Spectra Print site is one where there's a residential component to it as well. We're looking at duplexes along the Carroll's Lane area, as well as selling off smaller pieces of the Spectra Print Business Park to be able to also have jobs creation as a main component of those two districts. Jobs creation within mixed-use TIF districts, as well as some light residential and industrial TIF districts in terms of jobs creation, really are the main focus. When you look at a revitalization TIF, however, normally re-energizing an area that needs assistance because the free market in essence has passed it by, or there are market forces at work that pull a lot of development to other areas of a region, where we would have to engage to make sure that we can trump some of that energy and get the development in areas where we want to see re-energizing of our community. There's a big difference between a revitalization TIF district and a mixed-use or an industrial TIF district. Very different types of developments can be undertaken, for example, in a revitalization TIF district versus those that you would naturally see in a mixed-use or an industrial TIF district. So it really becomes one of the main tools that communities have to capture development and inject it in areas where we desperately need it. We have a lot of vacancies, some vacant land, some environmentally challenged land in downtown as well as on North Division Street. And it really creates the chance for us as a community to say, we know certain types of developments are going to happen within this 5 to 6 mile radius of the Stevens Point Plover area. Let's use these economic tools that we have to take some of these incentives and make sure that the projects that we want to see happen are happening where we most need them as a community, on sites that are already served by existing roads, existing utilities, but may already be vacant. That's why when we look at mixed-use residential developments for North Division Street as well as downtown, or other types of commercial and retail development, that revitalization TIF district helps us have the tools to get the development where we most need it as a community to be most successful when we look at our entire community as one growth and development priority. And I think that hopefully will get a chance to clarify some of the misconceptions. Some of those are that when folks build developments within TIF districts, they don't pay taxes. They do indeed pay taxes at the exact same level that they would if that project did not exist in a TIF district. That's a real important point for us to remember. So as we take that investment and that increment, that increase in value because of new construction, we focus it either on that new construction, using the very taxes that a developer pays, their own taxes, go back to making sure that the district becomes more solvent, new projects, street construction, and other aesthetic priorities happen within those districts as well. So I hope that gave you a chance to at least have a general definition of what a TIF district is, a geographic boundary whereby we capture the growth and reinvest it back in that district. The fact that we've hopefully clarified that as developments happen within TIF districts, developers do pay the exact same amount of tax that they would pay anywhere else in our community. And at the same time, especially clarifying those differences of TIF districts, because that is an important point. Revitalization TIF districts can take into account any different type of project. Not necessarily jobs creation. It may very well be environmental remediation or demolition of an aging structure. Sometimes that's very important, hence the revitalization component of the revitalization TIF districts. So I hope that clarifies. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. The link, of course, is right here on the website, so you can email me with either feedback on this video blog or other questions that you might like me to explain or expound upon in terms of how we move forward. One of the other misconceptions is that the school district will be hurt by growth that happens within a TIF district. Well, it gets back to the but-for example and the but-for test that's embedded within the statutes that allow for TIF districts to exist. But for the use of these incentives, these projects would never happen. And that's important because in the future, when these TIF districts close, the school district, the county, the state, as well as mid-state, reap that added tax base. So the tax rate, of course, is lessened for all of the other taxpayers in the 5 different jurisdictions. And equally so, as those TIF districts are successful, we accumulate fund balances within those TIF districts. And that's not the city's tax dollars. Those 5 taxing jurisdictions still have a stake in exactly what those fund balances are. So at the end of a TIF district, ultimately, if we have $1 million fund balance, the city would naturally get their share in the form of a fund balance. But so would the school district, the county, the state, and mid-state. So they are really the one economic development tool and the one tool that cities do have in their economic development tool chest that allows us to be successful and redirect development into areas where we most desperately need it as a community, as opposed to very flat, open, and cheap land at our periphery. It's very expensive to take over a site and revitalize it. The TIF district allows us to have those tools to ensure that we have infill and reinvestment in our city center as we have new growth and growth at our periphery. A healthy community and a stable community cannot move forward unless it has both of those working in harmony. Infill and revitalization, as well as new growth at our periphery. We feel that the use of TIF districts, of course, helps us harness those 2 philosophies so we have a sound and all-encompassing economic development priority and package and, in essence, mission as we move forward as a community. So I hope that helps. Feel free to give me your feedback and answer any other questions that I might be able to for you via email, should you have any of those. Thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to many more video blogs as we continue.